I'm very pleased to welcome today's presenter, Zeynep Ürkün, and the title of today's talk is Academic Writing, the Value of Short Answer Responses. So that's great. So I think we can see Ürkün there. So it's great to have you here. Let me just introduce her. So Zeynep has been working in the area of assessment and evaluation since 1991. She was a trustee on the IATEFL Executive Committee for 6 years and the event coordinator of the IATEFL Testing, Evaluation and Assessment SIG for 10 years. In her capacity as the TEA SIG coordinator, she organised several conferences around the world to help support assessment literacy. Previously, she worked at Bilkent University and at Boğaziçi University in their testing teams and worked as the assessment coordinator at Sabancı University for 15 years. And after working as the CEO of Make-A-Wish Turkey, that's a charity that grants the wishes of children with life-threatening medical conditions, she's now gone back into academia and currently works as the assistant director of Kadir Has University School of Foreign Languages. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and I'll hand you over now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I feel like since I'm hosting you in my living room, I feel like I've invited 1,500 people, maybe slightly over that, to have tea in my place. So welcome to my living room. This is great. I think it's a wonderful opportunity that I'm able to talk to so many of you. I hope you are all fine and healthy, and all your loved ones are fine and healthy in these really extraordinary times that we are going through. Basically, before I start, I would like to actually find out where you are and what you do, really briefly. And for this purpose, I prepared 2 poll questions, and my colleague at Cambridge University Press, Evie, is going to help me with that. So the first question is, where do you currently teach? At what level do you currently teach English? Could you please indicate your answer, and we'll see how this is going to play out. Okay, so do you teach primary, secondary, tertiary, or adults? Okay, thank you. Oh, wow, so we've got people teaching at all levels. Secondary, primary, I saw some tertiary, different, all at the same time. That's great. Okay, so the results are coming out. That's great. So it seems as if a majority of us are actually tertiary and adult education. But we've got a healthy number of participants who teach at primary and secondary as well. Thank you so much. Wow, yes, the information keeps coming in. And we've got teacher candidates as well, which is wonderful. Welcome. I hope you get quite a bit out of this webinar. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. So Evie, are we able to see the results again? Because I saw the results, but there we are. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. This does give me an idea. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the second question, the second poll question. This time the question is going to be about what type of writing do you teach? What type of tasks do you teach? Do you currently teach? So here you can choose more than one. obviously, because you might be teaching more than one of these options. We've got essay here, which is a rather general term, isn't it? We've got our own understanding of what an essay means. Same goes for paragraph. To all of us, the paragraph can mean slightly different. We may have slightly different expectations. I see some of you said standard essay. That's an interesting one. And what we mean by that. Academic writing comes up a lot. Of course, there's a lot under that, under academic writing. Some of us teach general English. Well, maybe some of you teach summary, research report, proposal writing. Yes, essay writing, letter writing. Okay, that's interesting. And some of you teach towards certain exams, several, yeah, preparation for exam courses, I can see. Okay. Oh, you stopped teaching. Oh, I'm really sorry. Yeah, this is such an extraordinary time that the whole world is going through, but for us teachers, it's especially interesting, isn't it? Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe if we can see the results. Oh, yes. Okay. Wow. Look how high the percentage of those of us who teach essay is, followed by paragraph. A lot of summary writing too. Well, short answer responses, that's great. This is basically what this talk will be about. Text-based longer response, I would be very interested in finding more about that. And some more academic skills like research, proposal, and literature survey, and so on. Thank you very much for sharing all that. Evie, thank you so much for running the polls for me. I now have more or less a better idea of where you are and what you teach, and how you teach it is another matter, of course. So what we are going to do is we're basically, I hope you can see my screen now. Wait a minute, give me a second. And in a minute, you should be able to see my screen. Okay. So now that I have a little bit of a better idea about where you are and what you teach, what I'd like to talk about today is the value of teaching and assessing short answer responses in an academic setting. Well, we're English teachers at the end of the day. We teach English, and good English teachers actually teach from the heart, don't they? Regardless of the material that we have at hand, and sometimes we don't have any material at all, which is possible, because we are dedicated, because we like what we do. When we actually start teaching English, then material is important, but teaching from the heart is even more important, especially considering the fact that during this pandemic, all of us had to very, very quickly adapt to a world where we had to start doing online teaching, online activities, and so on, without any prior training or very little training, without prior warning. We were sort of thrown into it. Now, in my opinion, I think teachers are superheroes anyway, and I think all teachers who had to go through what we had to go through in the last 6 or 7 months definitely deserve a superhero badge. So here's my badge to all the English teachers out there, which is a wonderful characteristic that we have. We want to save the day. We want to save the world even. As English teachers though, it's also true that we are in this constant search for meaning. We need to find meaning in what we do and find meaning in what we teach. So as English teachers, in our search for meaning, we are probably the people who put more thoughts into a novel, for instance, than the original author ever did, because we are constantly searching for meaning. And when we are searching for that meaning, then in what we teach and how we teach it every single day in our language classrooms, this is a question that had bothered me quite a bit a while back. So teaching the 5-paragraph essay then, is it meaningful? Why is it meaningful? Should we continue to teach it? Is it the only format that we need to be concentrating on? And I was not alone. Other people have been worrying about this as well, because we were teaching the 5-paragraph essay as a format to our language learners. Now, teaching writing at university level is a little bit tricky. There's quite a lot that we expect students to learn, and there are a lot of considerations that we need to keep in mind. Now, when we teach university English academic writing, then we expect students to be able to understand what the prompt is asking for. So what is this question asking for? We also expect students to be able to understand all the clues that they are given as to the kind of answer, the amount of detail that is required in that prompt, in the question. Now, those clues that we expect students to find and make sense of, those clues may seem obvious to us as English teachers, but I'm not sure if they are that obvious to our learners, especially the learners who only experience academic writing, what we mean by academic writing, in the form of 4-paragraph essay or 5-paragraph essay. And especially those students who sort of develop this idea that all academic writing is in that format, in exactly the same format as a 4 or 5-paragraph essay format, which requires an introduction with lots of rules, with some paragraphs, again, certain rules with the topic sentences, controlling ideas, and so on, and must have a conclusion paragraph as well, once again, with additional requirements. Well, they also need practice with a variety of prompts. So not just one type of question, but several types of questions. And they need to be able to practice writing under timed conditions, because there will always be a time limit, regardless of what they are studying at university, what department they are going to study. And so what we expect is, we expect students to build exam answering expertise through developing familiarity with the processes of writing under time constraints, through developing familiarity with the patterns of particular types of questions, because certain types of questions require certain types of responses. And we also expect them to respond in an organized fashion, in a concise way. And while they're doing all of that, we also expect them to form linguistically accurate responses. Now, that's a lot to ask, I think, and you probably agree with me. So, in order to be able to do all of this, our students are going to need guidance on how to predict questions based on a class study, because at the end of the day, when they move on to their departments and when they start studying their own fields, information in their own degree program, then they're going to have to predict questions on what the course offers them in terms of content. That's a real life skill that they need to develop. They also need plenty of input in various forms on a particular subject before we can ask them to write a piece of production about it, produce a piece of writing about it. 18, 19-year-olds really don't know that much about the world. They do need a lot of support in developing content which they can talk about. So for that, they're going to need plenty of input. We also need to expose our learners to sample texts, model texts, not just one, but several of those, so that they can understand the method of organization and idea development that is unique to particular text types. And for that, they also need quite a lot of input. They also need to learn to write about what they've learned, not what they knew before they entered the class. No, so not what their opinions are, but what their opinions are about what they learn in their classes. And actually, many university prompts, which we've analyzed, make it very, very explicit. And they say, based on the lectures that you've listened, or based on your reading on the subject from this and this material. So most university prompts are really, really specific in terms of what type of response they expect as far as the content of it is concerned. And so all of this means that students really only should state their own opinion when they are explicitly asked to do so. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying 18, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds don't have any opinions. Of course they do. But at the end of the day, they are in faculty to form, to improve previously conceived opinions in line with the texts that they read, in line with the lectures that they listen to. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Therefore, when we are teaching academic writing, we probably want to have a look at what we ask them to write and how we ask them to write. Now, when we did this at the university where I was working, when we did this study, we realized that we were only teaching and assessing a limited number of task types, i.e. the essay, and only the essay. And from what I've seen in your responses, it seems similar. It seems like a similar situation in many contexts. And when you're only teaching the essay, then that requires putting a lot of emphasis on the structure, even when it's just 4-paragraph essay. Because in my university, we'd already moved to the 4-paragraph essay from the 5-paragraph essay, because we realized, reading essay after essay, that the third body paragraph, where they developed another idea, didn't really provide a lot of additional information about a student's language ability, language level, that the previous 2 body paragraphs didn't really already provide us with. So what happens then is, if we're only teaching the essay, then there is an imbalance in the language that we teach and the language that students are going to need in their target situations, i.e. when they move to their department. And the biggest issue was, and this really disturbed me and a lot of my colleagues, when we only teach the essay, what happens is they mastered the structure really quickly, very, very fast. So how to write a topic sentence, how to introduce an idea, how to write a hook. But they really couldn't manipulate the language as we expected them to within the, inside the body paragraphs. But that is really what we want. We want to see how they are exploiting the language, utilizing the language that we teach them when they produce a piece of written output. So we carried out needs analysis to see what was going on and what we could do about it. Of course, the first group of informants that we asked were our own instructors. We asked them, so which academic text types do you think our students should be expected to produce in our courses? And in the interviews, there were several findings, obviously, but 2 were really outstanding. Our instructors said, well, whatever the faculty needs are, we need to be teaching our students towards those needs, which of course made a lot of sense. And the second one was, look, it's essay after essay after essay. Is there no life after the essay? So they basically said, we need to teach more text types, analyze and teach more text types. And when that was the response, of course, that made us think. The second group of informants we asked were our faculty members. Now, that was more difficult, I have to admit, because faculty tutors are very, very busy people. So we held interviews with some of them, correspondence with others, but we really asked quite a bit. We asked them to provide us with sample assignment prompts and answers in first and second year of faculty. So we asked them, what type of question types do you use when you ask students to write something, from timed essay to research report and so on? We also asked them the writing conditions that students had to be exposed to in faculty. How much time do you allow? What length do you expect? Do you put a word limit? And we got some really interesting findings. We asked them what proportion of your course grade consists of written production. And we also asked them to send us sample assignments, sample question types, and samples of student production. So we did ask quite a bit. We had lots of data. We collected data from 3 faculties: science faculty, engineering and science, the humanities, and also economics. So quite a healthy amount of data. Now, here are the findings. I'm going really quickly, I know, but I hope if you have questions, you can ask them at the end. This is what we found. And this was really, really interesting because we saw that the majority of the type of length that was expected in faculty, in departments, was 1 page or less. In fact, half a page and quarter of a page was really, really high in number. And this was an incredible eye-opener because in our course, this is what we had: 2 pages, that's it. So it made us realize, we're not reflecting quite a lot of the target situation at all. And that was a problem, obviously. We also looked at the prompts that we received and we categorized them according to the rhetorical functions that were expected in the prompts. And once again, an interesting finding was that argument was covered, they spent the least time on argument, asking students personal opinions, whereas description was exceptionally high. Explanation was really all they wanted, obviously, and description was quite a high expectation as well. And so when we saw this data, again, this made us think, how many of these functions do we actually teach? And how many of these functions are our students able to produce when they leave our courses, when they go to their faculty? And so the next step was to classify the type of exam prompts that we received, assignment and assessment prompts that we received. And in order to categorize them, we used Dean Horowitz's typology, which was done back in 1986, but it was done in an ESL context in Western Illinois University. And it really fit what we found. We found that the #1 type of prompt that faculty tutors required was a type of question which required students to display familiarity with a concept. Now, it looks really complicated as a title, but actually, this is something we teach all the time. Every time we say define this, explain this, describe it, then we are actually asking our learners to display whether they are familiar with that concept. And of course, this is followed by define it and explain it. Describe it and explain it and give an example of it. Now, you can put anything in place of hoplite, in place of X. It could be hoplite, it could be Bolshevism, It could be a hunter-gatherer. Some of you may know what hoplite is. I didn't. Apparently, a hoplite is a Greek soldier. Okay, so that was the most important, most outstanding expectation in faculty. Can you define something and can you give me an example of it? Second in line was displaying familiarity with the relation between and among concepts. And once again, really simple, this is what we teach all the time. Comparing two ideas or talking about what they don't have in common, talking about causes of something or effects, and classifying different types of things. And this was also very, very common in faculty. The third type was, well, process, how something works. So explain to me how fascism rose in Germany and Italy. Describe the process in which you would treat a patient with lymphoma and so on. So how does something happen step by step? And finally, only in the fourth category came displaying familiarity with argumentation. So quick examples, summarize the arguments for free trade or against free trade. And if you look at the last example, Fukuyama says, we've reached the end of history. To what extent do you agree? This was still not a student's personal opinion. This was still based on the readings that they carried out previously. So basically, when we had this data, displaying familiarity with a concept, nearly 70%, and then between concepts, and then process, and very little argumentation, what we had to do was to revise the whole of our writing program. And we came up with the idea that, we need a more principled perspective when we teach short answer responses. And we ended up deciding that, and looking at the examples, what we mean by a short answer is a response which consists of something between 80 to 120 words, depending on the level that you are teaching. When they are responding, then they may be asked to use one rhetorical pattern of the ones that I've already shared with you. Could be definition, could be description, could be comparison, talking about reasons, result. But longer types can definitely involve a combination of these rhetorical patterns. So we established that, and we thought we would start teaching it. So displaying familiarity with concept, relation, process, and argumentation. We decided to do these because in our search for meaning, we realized that if we want to teach make our teaching of EAP more meaningful, then we need to include this component into our teaching. But then, of course, came the idea of, okay, it's all very well to teach it. How are we going to assess it? How are we going to test it? And so that marriage was slightly more difficult, as most marriages are. But if you can establish a good rapport between the couples, then marriages are positive things, happy things, good things. So basically, it was quite important that since all of this is based on themes, learning the theme, learning as much information as possible about a topic, then we would need to expect students to gain greater mastery of content so that they could then display their knowledge and apply that knowledge. And so we decided we have to include this as part of syllabus. We can still continue to use traditional reading and listening tasks, so we're not throwing those away. It's just that we are approaching them from a different angle. So when you actually do, in quotation marks, a reading or a listening in class, what we need to do is to exploit those texts, whether written or spoken, from the angle of what ideas the text contains, the ideas that are worth learning, the ideas that are worth remembering. And this is more meaningful and authentic anyway, because this is what happens in faculty. So the what we try to do is to ask and elicit from our language learners, so what ideas does this text explain? Are there any descriptions? Are there any comparisons? And so on. And also, of course, as we are doing this, we exploit the types of rhetorical patterns that are utilized in the text. So what patterns did the text use to explain causes? What patterns did the text use to talk about results and so on? And so the language of the realization of rhetorical patterns also is taught and reinforced. And in this way, hopefully, not just our teaching, but our assessment of it becomes more meaningful. And so basically, here are a few examples. An extended definition could be, what is flow theory? Explain what flow theory is with an example. What are two differences between doing and being cultures? Or what are two factors that lead to a higher risk of heart attack? So really things that we do, we elicit from our learners in class, verbally perhaps all the time. Of course, more importantly is the criteria. So when you're assessing a short answer response like this, your criteria cannot be longer than the response. If the maximum expected response is 120 words, then your criteria has to be short. So we came up with a certain set of criteria. So the first thing, obviously, we need to look at is use of language, because we are language teachers, aren't we? So have the language and vocabulary been used accurately so that the message in the short response is clear? The second part of the criteria is task fulfillment. This is where content comes in. Is there enough information, and is the information correct? I.e., did the student analyze the prompt carefully, and did the student respond properly to the prompt? And finally, of course, all that data that we collected was put into practice. Which rhetorical patterns did the prompt require? Did the learner use those rhetorical patterns accurately? And is it coherent? So organization comes into it as well. Although it's not very long, there still has to be a certain amount of organization within the short answer response. And I'd be happy to share these criteria with you, no problem at all, just let me know. We also came up based on dear Kari Smith's grading rubrics idea. In order to give immediate feedback to our learners, we came up with a grid. So when we're grading, all we do is actually put ticks into the relevant category, because when it's a short answer, as soon as you read it, as the grader, you realize whether it's at satisfactory level, whether it's below satisfactory, or whether it's better than just satisfactory. So grading is really, really quick as well. All right, lots of good things have come out of this. This led to a lot of very good, very useful discussion among students and among colleagues about what writing is, what our expectations are. And our approach to the teaching of academic writing really, really changed. There's more variety to what you teach. It's not just the essay. There's more variety, more meaning into the way we approach reading and listening text, which is great. And we think that we meet students' needs a lot more effectively. There's no need for lengthy introductions, no need for conclusions, or no need to start with a hook, because regardless of whether they are attracting our attention or not, we have to read these pieces anyway. So we got rid of all of those mechanical devices. And of course, we feel that the assessment results that we receive are a lot more meaningful. And with the grid that I've just shared with you, I think we are able to grade and double grade really, really quickly as well, which is very important, of course, from the practicality perspective. But there's always a but. There were some challenges. So what I'd like to do is, if you want to try this, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, you need to decide and reach a consensus on the core content that you are teaching and assessing. All language teachers should be teaching the same content in all language classes. And I'm going to show you an example how we do that. Terms need to be clarified. You'd be surprised the moment you start discussing what an essay is, you get all sorts of different responses. And so it's quite important to establish the common terminology among your colleagues. It has to be piloted. Please don't try this without piloting it on a small group of students first. But having done it in 3 different institutions with totally different needs, I can vouch for the fact that this works. But still, I would always trial. Instructors will need training. This is a slightly different approach to the teaching of writing. It's quite different from essay. Learners will need training. Learners pick up more quickly though, so training will be required. It's required so that everybody has ownership of this and everybody knows exactly what the rationale behind it is. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's why I recommend producing a short piece of document, guidelines, which can be shared with all teachers. You know, this is what we mean by a short answer response. This is how we assess it, and this is what we expect. You will need to prepare some supplementary materials, especially if you are using commercially available course books, as most of us do. And of course, assessment is an important issue. Please do establish certain parameters before you start assessing it. So as a result of all of this, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Can we do it? Can we teach it? Is it too much work? Well, my answer is yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It can be done. And the example that I'd like to share with you is actually from Unlock, which is probably, I wish I had a poll here just to find out how many of us currently use it. The Unlock series, and the example that I've picked is Unit 4, Customs and Traditions. Basically, what you need to do, this is what we prepare for every unit now. It may look too much information, like too much information or too crowded, but don't worry about it at all. This is actually a document stating the weekly objectives, well, unit objectives, basically, that we expect to be covered. So you got several objectives, skills objectives, language focus, and so on. What I would like you to have a look at, please, is the top line where it says topics. So what you need to do is to sit down with a small group of teachers, look at your reading text, look at your listening text, and analyze which rhetorical patterns do those texts cover, and therefore what we can expect students to understand and remember. So if you look at the first one, for instance, the first reading, obviously there's description of customs, and there's comparison of cultures. In the second reading, there's description and definition again. If you look at the first listening, that one contains description, definition, and effects, and causes and examples, and so on. So basically what we do is after we prepare this by a group of teachers, never a solitary activity, because this has to reflect what several of us actually understand from that text. We share this document with teachers and we share this document with students. So that means we set very clear expectations. When you finish this reading, when you finish this listening, it's all very well to have answered some comprehension questions or several other regular type of text exploitation ideas, but we want you to also be able to talk about the comparison of the cultures or the causes of changes, the effects of technology on traditions, and so on. So very transparently, this is shared with teachers and students. And the topics part actually constitute what you test in your short answer production and what you test in your spoken production, which is a topic for another webinar, I guess. So I'm sorry I had to rush through that. Well, thank you very much for joining me and for listening. This link, Simon has already mentioned at the beginning. This is where you will be able to access the recording. But if you've got any questions now, I would like to spare some time for questions. Simon, do I have time?
Yes, you do. Yes, I definitely
Okay.
wasn't going to stop you because we've had lots of great comments through about this webinar and how useful, interesting it was. I definitely think the study that you did was fantastic. So yeah, the link there is actually to the certificate, which you can.
Oh, sorry.
That's
yes.
all right. Which you can download and then enter in your name to the certificate. So there's the link for you. You can watch the webinars again if you go to the academic page, which is the cambridge.org/academic-English. And then we'll be putting up the link again to watch these talks again. I know that when people are using the chat box and thinking of ideas, you know, it's great to have an opportunity to be able to watch these again and pause the slides because some of them might go a bit quickly for you. But let's just end with a few questions here. So first one I have here is, how am I expected to assess my students without having to correct every single mistake with their written work? Yeah.
That's an excellent question. I'm so glad that came up. Well, the beauty of assessing short answer responses is the response is already short. So that means the assessment of it, A, takes very little time, and B, in light of the criteria, you don't really end up having to correct everything. And it's such a crucial point. You're right. It takes practice, but this is definitely, I know how it is when you have to correct essays. You've got like 350 words, 450 words in front of you, and you're like, oh, what do I really correct here? That's not the case with short answer responses. And if your curriculum really starts with short answer responses before students are asked to move on to longer pieces of writing, then via the short answer responses, a lot of the feedback given is going to lead to students correcting a lot of their problems, which means when they move to longer responses, they will be making fewer mistakes. I hope that answers it.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, my students don't have the vocabulary to write 4 paragraphs. So this is probably talking about lower levels. And there's a similar question, which is, how do you scaffold students learning academic English with low reading comprehension?
That's an excellent question. Thank you very much. I wish, Simon, though, we had an additional webinar to talk about that specifically. Now, vocabulary teaching obviously is exceptionally important. I mean, with average levels of grammar, you can make yourself understood, but without proper vocabulary, you basically cannot make yourself understood, whether written or spoken. So what we ended up doing, and this is actually happening a lot, this has started happening for the last couple of years, vocabulary teaching has gone back to the idea of providing vocabulary lists to students, first of all. So in order for us to expect a reasonable amount of vocabulary comprehension, first of all, we need to provide our learners with a proper list of vocabulary that we expect them to learn from every reading and from every listening input. Now, this is really, really important, because if we don't guide them towards the type of vocabulary that they need to be learning, and a lot of good course books, including Unlock, for instance, now has vocabulary lists for each input, which is prepared from a principled perspective based on the corpus work that they've done, showing, well, aligning with the CEFR, the expected words that are to be taught at that particular level and learned. I think what we need to provide, and this is what we do, I wish I had a copy of that. I didn't put it in my slides, but I'd be happy to share an example with you. For every reading and listening, we also provide students with a list of words that we expect them to learn from each reading, and a list of useful phrases, because words never exist in isolation, hardly ever are learned or used in isolation. So collocations, the words that those words go together with, are also exceptionally important. So basically, just like the topics that we expect from each input to be covered and learned, we also provide students with a list of vocab items and useful phrases, list of useful phrases. And I highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, students are lost, teachers are lost, and especially because, as I'm sure you know, research shows that in order for us to be able to test a word, a student has to, learners have to have been exposed to that word for at least 8 or 9 times, at least 8 or 9 times. And so out of what we can teach, there's a very limited amount that we can test anyway, and it has to be done from a principled perspective.
Excellent, thank you. I think we'll go over time a little bit because I know there's so many, I've got questions in 4 different places, so I'm trying, there's so many coming in. What's the best way, this is from Khalid, what is the best way to implement writing with virtual learning? So a very topical one. How could you do something virtually?
Well, to be perfectly honest, this is a challenge that I'm facing, and all of us are facing at the moment as well, all of my colleagues in the university where I work. Once again, I'm going to recommend short answer responses. Short answer responses are a must and can be easily taught, and feedback can be easily shared with students, even in virtual environments. What we do in my institution, and I recommend it again, is to hold one-to-one tutorials if you can with your students. If time doesn't allow, hold pair tutorials with your students, giving feedback to them on their short answer responses verbally via Zoom or any other platform that you are able to use. Students learn a lot from listening to the mistakes that they make, the other one makes. And so what happens is the teacher has a pair tutorial and very quickly goes over some of the issues in their written short answer responses and reiterates what needs to be done and asks for a rewrite. I think it's exceptionally important to bring in a portfolio writing element in the virtual environment, because we need to keep in touch with our learners. And unfortunately, there's a limit to these platforms which can provide us that human touch. And that's why I highly recommend one-to-one or pair tutorials.
Excellent. I will squeeze in one more. Can you please suggest through which methods or how we can assess a writing task of a large class of about 150 students? So this is like the large scale. How would you do something to cope with that number of students? I think it's probably quite common for a number of teachers.
Yeah. I mean, I so feel for you. And I really can't believe how you are actually able to teach a new language to such a crowded class. But once again, I think you need to be really, really realistic when you're teaching very large classes. There's an ideal that we would like to keep, but there's also the reality. You cannot really ask 150 students to produce longer pieces of writing. I would definitely switch to shorter pieces of writing. That's for sure. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Great, yeah, shorter. It's probably better in that situation, which comes back nicely to sort of round this off, because that was the title of your talk. So thank you very much again. Thank you for that really good